Well, hi. So we're very lucky to have Zoe here from Anika, and why don't we just actually start by asking you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Anika.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for meeting with me. My name is Zoe Chan. I'm the principal lawyer of Anika Legal. So a little bit about Anika, we're actually a pretty new community legal service provider. We provide free help to renters in very specific areas of tenancy law. The thing that makes Anika unique from other legal centres is our vision in terms of how to tackle access to justice issues is that we felt that students weren't, their utility weren't weren't utilised to its maximum. And so we saw that a really great way of tackling access to justice is to work really closely with students and design our processes around students rather than the lawyer, so that we can have more students helping us assist renters at scale. So that's a model we're really proud of and one that's proven to work over the last 3 or 4 years. So at the moment, with just one lawyer on board, we can take around, if that lawyer was working full-time on casework, we can do about 70 to 90 ongoing casework support at a time. And so that's huge. In a nutshell, the unique point of difference for Anika.
So tell us a little bit about, so the students, they come and work with you as interns, and so do they come to your office? What actually happens?
Yeah, so another point of difference for Anika is we are a fully remote workplace. So one thing that we saw as an obstacle for students to work with lawyers is that often internships are, you have to turn up 9 to 5 on a particular day, and that lawyer needs to kind of organize to delegate a bunch of work to last 8 hours for a bunch of students during that 9 to 5. And the process of doing that can actually be, from an efficiency point of view, not very efficient at all. Whereas if we're able to build in BAU, so business as usual processes, in the way we run our legal files and introduce students into that process in a way that's flexible and remote, we're actually able to get more work done overall. So many of my interns I've never met in person, even though we've worked very closely together. And often the first time I meet them in person is at the end of the internship or at the end of them volunteering, and they say Zoe, can we please catch up? Because I've never seen you face to face. And that's when I've seen him for the first time.
And what kind of technologies do you use for that remote working? Is it stuff off the shelf? Is it things that you built yourself?
Yeah, so it's a variety of different things. So another point of difference for Anika is because we're such a new organization, we've been able to grow within a very technologically advanced kind of ecosystem. So when we started as an organization, straight away, we're looking to the digital tools that are available out there. We landed on Slack as our main communications channel. And the reason why we landed on Slack is because there's a lot of integration options available with Stack, with a lot of off-the-shelf products like Trello, like Monday.com. It just depends on what your role is in Anika. You can have the world is your oyster with integrations. But in addition to that, other things that integrate into Slack can be bespoke systems that you build. So for example, our internal CRM, so our case management system for our legal work, is actually built in-house by our volunteer developer, our head of tech, Matt. We're really lucky to have that because it means that we can build the system to reflect exactly what we need to do in our very specific user case of a remote flexible workplace and with a lot of students supporting few lawyers. And because we use Slack and because it's so integratable, we can actually build various versions of various things happening on Slack would actually deliver a notification to Slack. So at the moment, we're getting notifications if we get emails via Clark. The student will get a notification and they'll be able to progress the matter from there. And these features aren't currently in Slack, but by the time this video is played, it may be in Slack. We will also have other types of notifications going to Slack regarding, when a case stage changes. So for example, when we sent the client agreement and we're now at the advice stage, we can design Clark in a way so that when the case stage changes, it delivers a notification to the student being like, hey, congrats on getting the client agreement signed. Your next steps are X, Y, Z. And those next steps would mirror the current next steps that we have in a case manual that is in every single case.
Fantastic. But so there's a lot of alerts and Slack just pinging, especially for the for the supervising lawyer, if you've got somewhere between 70 and 90 cases, that's a lot of activity every day, which kind of brings us to the problem that we want to talk about. Can you actually, I'm going to leave it with you. Tell us about the problem as it works for Anika at the moment.
Yeah, so something that we've always been really kind of mindful of is, in addition to doing really great work for our clients and looking after our clients, which I'm confident all our workers do because we have such great interns who are very compassionate and wanting to do the right thing. Often for people working in law, we just want to help the client, but we forget to help ourselves. And especially for, people who are more junior in the profession. I mean, actually, even people who are senior in the profession, but we want to make sure we're starting the people junior in the profession right on the right track first.
Yeah.
They forget that they need to look after themselves, and they may not even be aware that mental well-being is a thing, because often people in law school are still thinking like, I need to achieve.
Yeah.
So that is something we're constantly very concerned about, especially when a lot of our students are working on the front lines with people who are quite vulnerable, who may have particular accessibility on communication needs. Or even people who are actually quite educated and, usually they have really high capacity, but they're just going through a really stressful time. And it means that sometimes the interactions aren't always positive. It can be negative. And I'm always blown away by how resilient our students are in dealing with these interactions when they arise. They're really compassionate. They're able to put the client at ease. But we are concerned that in a remote setting where I never actually get to overhear the conversation or hear the red flags from the student's point of view, it can be difficult for us to ensure that we're also protecting our students that are working with us as well.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I mean, I know one of the things that I learned myself during lockdown is how much you learn from being around other people that you don't necessarily even notice that you're learning by osmosis. And especially for junior lawyers and even interns at this, they're not necessarily seeing the way that more experienced practitioners deal with distressed clients. And that's a big load to put on them. So can you give us some examples where this kind of problem has played out and how it's affected the range of stakeholders in Anika?
Yeah, absolutely. So firstly, I'll introduce the range of stakeholders at Anika.
That's a good idea.
So we do have the interns. So at the moment, we have around like 20 to 30 at a time. So they're all doing like
some of them from RMIT, right? So
some of them are from RMIT. So potentially listening to this recording right now, they happen to be doing a hackathon too.
Which is great. And those students should identify themselves, by the way, in the groups, because you'll have really valuable input.
Yes, there will be specialist users.
Yeah, exactly. So the interns who are law students?
Yep. So we have interns, and then within kind of the day-to-day running of the legal practice, we do also have what we call paralegal leads. So paralegal leads kind of help me in the back end in triaging cases and responding to inquiries from the public who aren't clients yet, as well as kind of supporting interns to send out emails and give them guidance on what to do with a case when it doesn't have to do with its legal strategy, or sending out an email that doesn't require legal advice. So they're around to kind of provide that type of support. In addition to that, every single case has a supervising lawyer, and that supervising lawyer is most likely going to be either me or our other lawyer, Kaushi. But it may also be secondee lawyers, because from time to time we do have law firms who second lawyers to us to assist with managing, supervising some cases. They supervise a lot less cases. So our secondees tend to supervise like 10 cases at a time, whereas the internal Anika lawyers do 50 to 70 at a time. So their caseload is a lot smaller, but they are also around. However, they're not around on Slack, because most law firms block Slack. But they are around on email and Clark. So it's a different way of working there. And so that's probably like the Anika universe within legal practice, but outside of legal practice, we have a lot of other types of users that may interact with legal practice from time to time. So we've got people in the products team, we've got people in the user team, and they might interact with the legal practice from time to time to get our feedback so they can do their work.
For a second, can you just explain a little bit more, when you're using product, and user in that sense. Can you talk a little bit more about what that means at Anika?
Yep, absolutely. So our product team are the people who develop and maintain our like case manuals. So every single one of our case, when it's uploaded, automatically gets a suite of resources. And so the first one is a case manual that is a step-by-step guide about how to run that case. And then there's like a bunch of precedents, like precedent 1 to 10, and then also template emails. So our products team is the one that is in charge of developing that and maintaining that.
Okay, so, and precedents, just because we're dealing with law students who might not be interns or might not have worked in practice, just to make life really annoying, when lawyers say precedents after law school, they're not talking about a high court case. They're essentially talking about template and example documents that can be used and reused, where, you know, anything that's reproducible, you add the skill in later. So
yeah, absolutely, that's right. Thank you for the clarification.
Oh, no. I just, it's one of those things, and it's one of the reasons why these students may, in fact, be well placed to help you. And I'm saying this as much to them as to you, is because when we're in our own space, we see it, we use the language, and we don't notice the things outside or the things that we do differently. And just the more that we give these students an opportunity to kind of get into this world, but not be of this world, the more likely they are to see something you haven't seen yet. So, that's why I'm doing it.
No, that's one of the common questions we get at the start of internships. When they're like, precedents? And I'm like, yeah, that Word doc there, that's precedent.
That's a precedent.
And the reason why we don't call it template is because we also refer to our template emails. So we had to find like 2 words.
Yeah.
Otherwise people get really distracted.
The legal profession worldwide calls them precedents. And templates are usually forms, really. But anyway, and template suggests something that is more complete, where you're just filling in the gaps, where a precedent is a good first draft.
Yes, that's right. So we've got those, and that's what the product team does. And our user team they do user research, and that user research might relate to our own case team. It might, they might come and speak to me sometimes if they need to research a particular thing relating to my experience. They might speak to our interns sometimes. But we also use this team to do user research with some of our clients from time to time, depending on what projects we have.
So it's about user experience.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so can you? We've got the stakeholders. Let's move on to can you share an example of where we have this problem arise, where an intern might have been unsafe or been suffering in some way, and if you could talk about that experience from as many perspectives as you can, really.
Yeah, sure. I might just actually finish off the Anika universe.
Oh, sorry.
So we've got product and user, and then we've got our other executives. So we have Jackie, who's our head of ops, and she's also looks after our people and culture within Anika, which is something that we're growing because we are a small organization, but we want to do it right from the first time. We don't want to forget about it. And then it's like, we're a great organization 6-7 years later, and we're like, oh, we completely forgot about culture.
Start out the way you mean to continue.
Yeah. So that's Jackie. And then we also have Nolan and Lucy. So Noel's our CEO and Lucy is our head of partnerships. So their interaction with the case team is usually through me and Jackie, whereas Jackie and I are quite, we interact with interns all the time. So that's the Anika universe.
And the partnerships then, so who are the partners?
So what we mean by partnerships is Lucy's basically in charge of getting us money. But also in charge of our comms and our branding and that kind of stuff. So when we say partners, I guess we mean the partners that will give us money.
But that is actually, at the end of the day, that's an important part of your ecosystem, right? And
extremely important.
And those, I am making a big leap here because I would say it's assumptions here, but I'm thinking that that's a combination of interested parties in the sector, which could be lawyers, they might be tenant agencies, they might be developers or people in the property sphere, a range of different people. And what you do, both in the immediate and in the bigger picture, is going to matter to the reasons why they're actually sharing funds with you. So if it turns out you break interns, that can impact your relationship with the funders as well. Well, it should. Quite frankly, but it might not,
yes,
but it should.
You would hope so. And that's the thing, like Anika really wants to do things well. Like often a lot of organizations out there, they kind of figure out how to maintain the relationship with the funders without, you know, I'm not saying they're lying, but like they know how to protect themselves. But for Anika, it's really important to us that when we say to a funder, we're doing best practice, like we really are doing best practice. So because we're such a small org, there's a lot of laws out there that actually don't technically apply to us. We kind of have to opt in. So that's the same in privacy, but it's important to us to try and do the right thing, not only because it's the right thing, but also because you don't want to be a really successful organization in 7 years' time and suddenly realize, oh, we built our organization in a way that doesn't comply with any regulations.
Yeah.
At all.
Can I ask a quick question that came to my mind? Where does the name come from?
So Anika is I don't know how the founders initially came up with his name, but Anika is the Hindu goddess of justice, but also change. So it fits an organization that deals in law and justice, but also like the fluctuation of innovation. It kind of like puts those two together. Yeah.
So the values are embedded in the name.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Well, and also just will be of interest to people doing the hackathon. Anika is the product of a legal hackathon, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. So I wasn't part of this journey. Nolan is. And I think, it was like a hackathon. They ended up going to New York, coming second place. And then thought, well, since we did so well, let's put all our eggs in this basket and make it a reality because it's a good idea. So we want to make it a reality. And that's the journey that Anika has been on since 2018. So not that long at all.
No.
And I kind of joined Anika about 1.5 years ago. So after like the foundations had been laid, but the last year has really been a kind of journey of, well, the foundations had been laid. Let's try and grow it a little and make some things a little bit more set in stone and see how that lands us. And, you know, to great success. Like I felt like Anika's changed a lot in the last year because we pursue these kind of like values of innovation and iterative change. You can actually find that you change very quickly in a short space of time if you embed those values in your organization.
And that's great knowledge or knowing that for students who are doing this hackathon. It's like, it's sounding to me like you're not afraid of a big idea, something that's completely different. But clearly you've got some constraints there that students will need to think about. So but we still need to actually talk about what the problem looks like. And I'll move on to that thought when we've done that. So give us an example of what the problem looks like.
Yeah, so I think the most common way in which this problem can arise is, say an intern gives a client a call and the client's just really frustrated. They might be yelling, they might be swearing, they randomly might be like checking out of the call, because that's what happens when people feel overwhelmed. They can be erratic in the way that they communicate. And let's, in this example, make the intern a particularly compassionate person who really, really, really wants to help and just feels awful that in that moment, the problem can't immediately be fixed. And that's something that a lot of people in the law frequently deal with, especially in the earlier stages of your career when you haven't yet been able to figure out how to, manage those boundaries yet. When you're someone who really, really wants to help and you can't fix that person's problem and you can see their emotions, it can be really overwhelming for both people. The intern being a great intern and, very compassionate person who's also very intelligent and able to communicate, is able to put the client at ease, and the client leaves the conversation feeling, okay, I feel a little bit better about right now. I'll wait for them to contact me next week. And after the phone call, the intern might have a little cry because that was an overwhelming conversation. And if you were in an in-person workplace, as the supervising lawyer, I would see all this play out. immediately after the call, I would be right next to them being like, do you need to go for a walk? Are you okay? Do you want to debrief? In a remote workplace, that's not available as an option to us. I didn't even know this call occurred. I may never know that this call occurred. And so what happens with that is that intern, being a very great intern, would likely leave a file note immediately. And they might leave the file note just saying, spoke to the client, explained the advice that Zoe sent to them. They agreed to wait until next week for the next steps. And that's all we see. It's very possible that that's where it ends. And I look at the file note next time and go, oh, cool, this case is progressing. Good job, Jane. Let's say this person's Jane. Good job, Jane. I'll get back to you next week about the next part of the advice. That's where it might end. Another way in which that interaction can proceed is the intern can self-identify that, actually, I really don't feel good after that phone call. And they might reach out to the lead rostered on that day to chat because they're more of like a peer level person and they feel more comfortable interacting with them. If they do that, the leads, again, so we usually recruit our leads from the high performing intern pool. So again, usually we have very, very compassionate people who want to do their best for Anika, who are also volunteers. They will likely have a chat with that person just to be like, hey, are you okay, etc. But sometimes I am concerned because technically speaking, like our leads although they're very high performing, they are still students. They haven't received the training experience, like in terms of management and pastoral care, that lawyers who have been working in a sector for a while have received. So while I'm really happy that they're able to provide that peer support, I do always encourage our leads to, escalate issues to the supervising lawyers if they think, they need to. And we have like a very set process for every lead at the end of every day that they're rostered on to give a summary about what happened that day so that I can just scan it quickly and see like, oh, they had a conversation with a particular paralegal about something. If they felt that it was serious enough to be escalated, then I better check in with the paralegal too. So that's another way that it could, that situation can eventuate. A third way might be that intern just comes straight to the supervising lawyers. And this does happen from time to time because in Anika, our supervising lawyers are, we say, be mindful we're really busy, but we are always accessible if you're, really desperate. Like, I'm never going to be like, oh, you had a really troubling phone call. Well, I'm not free today. I'll chat to you tomorrow. Like, I'll never do that. If someone is saying that they had a troubling phone call, I'll be like, what do you want to do? You want to chat on Slack? You want to call me? Like, what's going on? Let's chat. Let's debrief. So that is a possible option, but honestly, one that's quite rare. And I don't know if that's because we haven't had any phone calls that are so troubling that the intern is like, I must speak to the supervising lawyer right now, or whether or not they know we're accessible, but because we're the ones marking their internships, they want to like look strong. Like, I don't know. So that's a few ways in which that situation could play out.
And are you seeing, have you had examples where there might not be one dramatic incident, but that kind of slow build up that impacts the way that people work? Maybe I'm harking back on my corporate lawyering days and thinking about the kind of like, that kind of dread that sits over dealing with people who you don't know, but you expect might be unpleasant or difficult. Do you see that kind of build up happening with interns from time to time?
Yes, but usually not during the internship. Potentially, if they stay on as volunteers after the internship, we do see the engagement kind of drop off after a while. And I think part of that is because during the internship, there are very specific structures of communications in place, not only within the context of like, this is week 1 of your internship, this is week 2 of your internship, but also there's more kind of scheduled one-on-ones with the lawyer, as well as group meetings. Whereas once they become volunteer paralegals, then we're like, cool, you're good. And we don't always have a chance to kind of put them in the same structure that an internship has. That's no longer a specific problem, because now that we have more interns than we ever have before, we're actually not using our volunteer paralegals to run casework as often. But a recent change I've made to our casework as well is introducing fortnightly case team meetings. So anyone who's doing casework are welcome to join this group meeting to debrief, talk about matters, learn from each other, and just have like a sense of teamwork. The first meeting is happening next Monday. So I don't know how effective this mechanism will be yet, but I introduced it because I wanted to provide another kind of like virtual in-person touch points to communicate and debrief about different experiences.
And what do you think, like if a team comes up with a solution that looks good to you and you find a way of implementing it, a year down the track, what kind of things would be different that indicate to you that this solution had the features and benefits that it needed to be a success? What would you be seeing being different in the organisation?
So I think what we would see as different in an organisation is, instead of like kind of like chasing down every single intern via the one-on-ones, like, which is like midway through the internship and one at the end of the internship, between those times, the supervising lawyer will also always have kind of like a reasonable sense of not only how that intern is performing, but also how that intern is feeling. It would be really great as well for us to get a sense of that intern's like motivations and how like their approach to this type of work, because often everyone has different personalities, right? Some people are just naturally more resilient. Some people are super compassionate, and sometimes the downside of being really compassionate is that you're not very resilient because you're just like an open marshmallow. So that kind of like personality difference can make it really difficult for us to read the file notes and be like, is this person okay? Because sometimes we see file notes that are like really harrowing, and I message the person and I'm like, yeah, it's chill, it's just legal practice, I'm good. And then sometimes I see file notes that are like, court client, everything was good. But then when I catch up with the intern for one-on-one, they're like, everything is awful, the world is full of injustice, or like going through some stuff, you know what I mean? And I actually can't tell based on a file note that is what they're feeling, because I didn't know that they have different personalities, because I haven't been around them for 4 weeks in person observing their body language, you know what I mean? So yeah, I think a successful solution would somehow enable us to get access to that type of read of the individual humans, even though there are so many of them compared to like one or two of us. But if a technological solution or even non-technological solution can enable us to get that sense, I think that would be extremely innovative. But then from a technical point of view, the features that we would like to see in a successful solution is one that integrates really well into the Anika world, which is very digital. Because we are on Slack and because we have a bespoke CRM, in a way, the world is our oyster in terms of what technology we can build into the system. Whether or not it's actually viable, as in whether or not we have the resources and money to build it, is a different issue. But the feasibility of many technological solutions are quite feasible because of the way we've built up our digital infrastructure.
So probably not by the time they watch this video for the first time, but we will talk in the hackathon about desirability, feasibility and viability. And we're going to look for desirability first and feasibility second. And we'll think about viability as we'll need to identify what questions will need to be asked about funding it and whether it's a long-term or a short-term solution and what that testing of that might look like. But I think students should feel encouraged that the desirability element is first. Like, do you want it? Is this what will work? And by you, we're thinking about all of those stakeholders. So is that going to work in your environment, in your culture? Is it going to work for the interns? Is it going to work for the paralegal leads? Is it going to work for you as a supervising lawyer? It's going to work for your executive. Is it going to work for your brand?
Yeah.
Those desirability questions are really key. And clearly the feasibility goes to, well, if we can use something we've already got, that's well and truly beats the fatigue and all of the other things that go with something new. So that's the challenge. So can I ask you the opposite question of the one I just asked you, which is?
Just one moment, just on
Sure.
the desirability point. I will note
Okay.
one more thing that we always consider when we look at what we're building and whether or not it's desirable, which is it creating additional workload for us? So we try to work in as streamlined a way as possible. Jackie and I are data entry or data monitoring and evaluation and data and process nerds. And we hate any process. We hate any process where you have to do the work and then open another spreadsheet and put in more data and then go here. Like, we want people, like, as you do the work in a digital system, do it in a way where all the data you would need to do anything else is automatically captured. So I think from a desirability point of view, that's something that we would like the students in a hackathon to keep in mind, because often what I've seen is like, here's a solution, do 10 more things. And it's like, well, yeah, if you do the 10 more things, of course you have a solution, but then you have to do the 10 more things. And that makes me psychologically unsafe.
Yeah, that isn't. And really, you kind of answered the next part of the question, which is like, well, what kind of things would not be a solution? Like, if we wanted the result to be everybody is psychologically unsafe, and we're the complete opposite of what we're talking, what kind of things would need to happen to nudge you along in the wrong direction? Like, clearly adding to the workload, adding unnecessary systems or unnecessary data entry. What else would be counterfactual to the solution?
Yeah, so I think, I did answer the next question actually. So what would be ineffectual is centering that solution on only one user. The reality is all users are in the same ecosystem, and so all user roles kind of need to be considered, even if you're centering a solution on a particular user. So like, kind of like, do no harm to other users, but also how do you best leverage other users in the solution to help the user you are trying to help. Other things that would be ineffectual, I think when it comes to psychological safety, there's a difference between we're around to make sure we're proactively supporting and protecting our workers and also clients. There's a difference between that and like pedantically being like, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? To the point of sometimes like people aren't okay, but they're not comfortable sharing, and it's okay. There is an element of personal privacy here that, you need to tread the right line. You need to like come up with a solution that enables us to fulfill our duty of care and follow any laws that might be out there in relation to employers' duties towards their workers, even if those workers are volunteers. Yeah. But also, not just centering the organization's legal requirements, but also centering like the person you're trying to protect. Like, what do they actually want? If they are someone who wants to be protected, but also are not comfortable sharing, like, not everyone is like that vulnerable. Like, what's the best way of giving a solution that protects everyone's psychological safety according to what they actually want? Because every person's different.
This is why this is such a good problem, because it's a really wicked problem. It's a really, nuanced and it's provides an opportunity for everybody to think about how do you do the right thing the right way, because pretending you care is not the same as caring, and so finding a way to digitally care in a genuine and authentic way is really, really interesting. And so is there anything, where we've now gone for almost 40 minutes, so is there anything else that you'd like to say to the students before they embark on this problem?
I think just like following up on that last point you raised, which I really agree with, it's just, an unsuccessful solution would be one where it looks like we care on the outside, but in reality, it's just a checkbox exercise. And unfortunately, I think a lot of kind of like solutions out there that are already in the workplace often look like a checkbox exercise. And it's not because the employer doesn't care, but it's just because sometimes that's the easiest way to be like, are we doing the right thing? But I wonder whether or not there's a way to go a little bit beyond that, because from the point of view of a worker, I've also been a worker myself. I'm currently a worker right now. The checkbox exercises sometimes actually add more stress to the worker, especially when they're feeling overwhelmed. So yeah, like I think the hackathon will be great. Like the world is your oyster. Like let's see what other like innovative solutions there are out there. Because I think the world is moving to a transitional, remote, virtual kind of workplace. And if we can get it right, like there's a potential for Anika to like learn from all of you to be a pioneer in this space.
Fantastic.
That's great.
I talked over you over and over again. Do you have anything to add, Marta?
No, that's great. Well, maybe I'm just curious. You've mentioned a bit the day-to-day, how it works, and how tech savvy you are with digital platforms and technologies. Do you work normally synchronously, so the cases are held over the phone? Is that the normal way to proceed?
As in like me personally or the interns?
The interns, yeah.
Yeah, so the interns will call the clients. It's really important to Anika that our clients have a human touch. So one of the reasons why we have so many interns is because it's impossible for one lawyer to have a human touch with 70 cases.
Yeah.
But the intern can be the human touch. Also, interns are like less emotionally tired than a lawyer who's been working for 7 years, giving an emotional touch. Sometimes I'm a little bit like, oh, like I also have psychological safety issues, and this is why I'm like putting in boundaries to protect me and also like the lawyer as well, right?
Yeah.
So interns love chatting to the clients, but whenever they're providing advice, they provide advice via email. And the reason for that is because we can document them drafting the advice, sending it to me or another supervising lawyer for approval, and we can document that the advice is provided via email with the lawyer's approval.
Yeah.
But other than that, the intern does, follow up with the client weekly or fortnightly, depending on where the case is at, by phone, just to check how they're going.
Yeah.
But the lawyers can basically, the interns effectively, other than the time that they're talking to clients, they can pretty much work at the hours that suit them, don't they? They're not necessarily doing the 9 to 5.
Yeah, and that also
5 till 9, which is the law firm way.
Well, they do work 5 to 9, but like 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. if that works for the uni schedule, which is totally.
Oh no, I don't understand those hours.
Yeah, so they can work whenever they want. Some interns actually really love it because I was a night owl student, so they're like, great, I can work at 2 a.m. If that's what they want. I'm not saying they should. I'm just not going to control when they work. They work when they can. The other thing we also kind of advise them at the start of the internship is like how to time block their work with Anika, so that I'm like, even though it's remote work, make sure you look at your week, schedule in Anika in like 2 hours, like every 2 days or something like that, so that we're kind of building that time management skills into them, which is also skills that you would need once you're in a full-time role to manage your different projects. And actually that's really key to mental health sometimes. For me, it is. Like I'm a sucker for productivity apps that help me time block. So those are some like key skills we are teaching them as well to get across the managing workload aspect of mental wellness.
And that actually can be an issue for lawyers at all ages and stages. It is, the more complex a problem is, the harder it is to know how long it'll take you to solve it, because you don't know the answer when you get the problem, right? So actually that can be quite, just even those activities of thinking, okay, everybody else is blocking out 2 hours to do that, but it took me 6 hours to do it. We were just talking about a task that really should never take me as long as it does, but it takes me so long to write assessment rubrics of all things. They just take forever. And I often feel at the end of that is like, I'm smart, I've done the work, why can't I do this quicker? And that's a very personal kind of, way that you work through the anxiety. And there are lots of examples of that happen in all sorts of law firms, where you promise something to a client within a particular amount of time, but it just takes you longer.
Yep.
And you know, those kind of things are, you know, part of that anxiety production.
Yeah, actually, that's really interesting, because it would be interesting if we get some solutions that focus on workload and prioritization and how different people deal with work. Because actually, like, working in a community legal center, I've heard so many times, like, oh, we get it. Of course, your mental health isn't good because you're dealing with clients who are like, I'm like, no, that's where I actually have training. And I can deal with like actually quite negative situations. The things that often cause me the most stress is workload or managing a range of stakeholders who all have different priorities. So for example, for some of our interns, sometimes I am concerned that because my workload is so high, I actually can't work to the same rhythm that they can with their casework. And so the delay that they have to explain to the client is actually not a delay caused by them, it's a delay caused by me.
Yeah.
And it can be really hard to kind of manage that conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's it used to I know when I was a partner in a law firm, one of the things that used to keep me up at night is when we would have summer clerks in particular, and they need interesting, juicy bits of work to do, but they can't be left alone unsupervised. And I've got all my workload, but I've got to try and find something that works for them that's not going to throw my schedule out. And it's such a like all about me problem.
Yeah.
But it is actually quite, I know nobody's going to feel sorry for me, but it's that, but it's worth the students thinking about these problems impact more than just the intern that is impacted by the immediate issue, and the concern and the impact on workload and the many things that people have to do, both in a preemptive and a proactive solution, really need to be taken into account.
Yeah, absolutely. And also the other thing with like when you have a large workload or like a large project or a big problem you have to deal with, there sometimes could be a blocker depending on how you are, because everyone thinks differently as well, right? And I'm still learning about how I think. It's really great that there's so much information online now that you can kind of self-learn, but you should seek a proper diagnosis from a professional if you seriously have a concern. But yeah, like, so for me, sometimes I look at a huge task and I'm so scared of tackling it that I just don't tackle it at all. And then it becomes a procrastination issue in relation to just that task. And then, you know, like when you actually go tackle it, you do it for half an hour and you're like, oh, I did it. Turns out it was totally okay. But that's something that can kind of affect everyone anywhere, not only within legal practice, but it can be quite common within legal practice, because often whether or not you're doing a project or you're dealing with a legal matter, you're like, oh, it looks complex, I'm not going to touch it. But when you go and touch it, or you realize all you need to do is go, oh, I don't have sufficient information, so I'll just ask for the information and then I'll wait. And that's the answer that is available at that time, and that's okay.
So true.
Absolutely. Yeah, and look, it is interesting. There are very few people who get into law school in the first place who aren't people who are used to being able to solve problems, being able to do what's expected of them. But the counter to that is many of them are not used to feeling uncertain or overwhelmed or not in control of the immediate situation they're in, or particularly not necessarily understanding what it is somebody else wants from them. They've navigated high school effectively by being able to produce exactly what the teacher wants, and it's pretty much progressed from there. So there can be some unlearning, and part of that is really important too. And you know, I'm guessing that in the longer term, a solution wouldn't just shelter people from discomfort, but find ways to move them through safely.
Yes, exactly. So I think embracing uncertainty. I'm always surprised by how often lawyers go like, oh, we're resistant to innovation because we're like, the way we think is completely different. And I'm like, no, because the way that a lawyer thinks is like, we need to embrace uncertainty, but we're the ones who put some elements of certainty on top so that it enables us to kind of weather uncertainty and find a solution through. It's actually completely similar to the way that you need to think about innovation. But it's just like, often lawyers go, like they hear the innovation word and they go like, block, that's not us. And it's like, no, that's fully us. Like we can definitely pivot the way we think to be very similar to that innovative culture as well.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's a great note to end on.
Yep.
Thank you so much for your time. I can't wait to show you some solutions.
Yeah, no worries. We're really looking forward to seeing it. Yeah. So thank you so much for giving me your time as well.
Oh, thank you so much, Zoe, for having us in this meeting.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Stop recording. Stop recording.